Happy Sunday. We're picking up part 13 with chapter 13. Caste, the origins of our discontents. The insecure alpha and the purpose of an underdog. The West Highland Terrier had been acting up since the divorce. He was just over a year old and had begun nipping and snarling once the presumed pack leader, the first husband, was no longer around. The Westie had not taken the upset to the social order in the household very well. He feared his world had collapsed, his survival was in danger, and had communicated his displeasure to the old alpha, the first husband, by nipping his nose once during a brief visit. I had to figure out what to do if I were to keep the Westie, which, to me, was the only option. I decided I had nothing to lose by consulting a canine behaviorist and found a Westie specialist who lived in California. I was expecting a list of instructions from her on how to better manage my terrier. What I got was a brief lesson in canine hierarchy and in how canines interact with one another, exert dominance or submission for the survival and wellness of the pack. The social hierarchy and vocabulary of wolves and canines runs throughout our culture. The alpha male, the underdog, the lone wolf, the pack mentality, in part due to our observations of the dogs we may have owned and to the seeming parallels between ourselves and this companion species of social animals. Current-day canine specialists have sought to correct the distortions of the term alpha male, the king of the world, the chest beater of popular imagining, that have worked their ways into our psyches. True alphas, the behaviorist told me, are fearless protectors against outside incursions, but they rarely have to assert themselves within the pack, rarely have to act with aggression, they bark orders, or use physical means of control. While I would never strike a dog or yank a choke chain, as I have seen other would-be alpha humans treat their dogs, my forbearance alone was not working, and neither were the shrieks of "no, no, no," when I found Chi-Chi chewing on another pair of slingbacks. See, that's what humans do, the behaviorist said. We treat them like children, but as pack animals, they respond to the cues of an alpha in a pack structure. A human alpha should never have to raise her voice. Dogs don't understand that. If you are having to raise your voice to get their attention, she said, a dog will not see you as the leader. You have already lost. A true alpha does not behave like that and doesn't have to. If a so-called alpha resorts to that, they are signaling that they are not in control at all. True alphas command authority through their calm oversight of those who depend on them. They establish their rank early in the life and communicate through ancient signals their inner strength and stewardship, asserting their power only when necessary. An alpha generally eats first, decides when and who will eat afterwards, inspires trust through firm shepherding for the safety and well-being of the pack. An alpha is not necessarily the biggest or the fastest, but usually the innately self-assured one who can chastise a pack member with a mere look or a low voice. A true alpha wields quiet power judiciously apportioned. You know that you are not seeing a true alpha, or, put another way, you have encountered an insecure alpha if he or she must yell, scream, bully, or attack those beneath them into submission. That individual does not have the loyalty and trust of the pack and endangers the entire group through his or her insecurities, through his or her show of fear or lack of courage. The behaviorist gave me a set of assignments to establish my role and assured me that once my Westie saw me as an alpha, the relationship would be reset, very likely for the good. The main goal was to bring order and consistency, firmness to my compassion. The first exercise was to let him know who controlled the means of his survival, the food. At the next feeding, I was to set the food bowl down, holding onto it, and then remove the bowl to let him know my role before setting it down again for him to eat. He was at first unsettled by this new move, but he adjusted to it. For the next exercise, I was to keep my hand on the food bowl the entire time he was eating. This he settled into as well. The last exercise was for me to set the food bowl down, hold the bowl, and then put my hands in the food as he ate to let him know that I was not afraid of him or what he might do. This I was not looking forward to. You have seen the size of a Westie's teeth, haven't you? I know, she said. He will not bite the hand that feeds him. When the time came for that last exercise, I set the bowl down and kept my hands in the bowl as he ate, and I discovered that there's a reason why dog behavior is built into our language. Dogs, for sure, and people, if they are wise, do not bite the hand that feeds them. The behaviorist also recommended that I consider getting another dog. Westies are particularly a social breed, and he would fare better with a companion. As much as I love Westies, I felt one spirited terrier was enough and looked for a gentle, easygoing breed. Enter Sophie, a Havanese. She was a 3-pound mop of fur that, as a puppy, could fit inside of my purse. I took Chi-Chi with me when I went to get Sophie, and he was fine with her at first, until we got her home. Uncertain as to what this intruder meant for the household structure, he began asserting himself as the alpha. If ever I looked away, he hunted her down under dressers and cabinets. At feeding time, he pushed her from her food bowl. One day, he went to shove her from her food bowl, and she stiffened on alert and glared at him looming above her, and she let out a tiny, barely audible growl, the first sounds ever to escape from her. Chi-Chi jumped, startled by this turnabout. His ears and ego flattened. He slinked back to his own food bowl with his tail between his legs. From that day forward, Sophie was in charge. From then on, it was she who would eat first, walk the doors first, remain a pace ahead of him at all times on the walks. Though she was only half his size once full grown, she could pin him to the wall to keep him in line if she chose to, and whenever she corrected or corralled him, he stepped back and submitted and then nudged her to play. The Westie had been an unconvincing and ill-suited alpha, but made for a relaxed and contented beta, with his tail bouncing and being lighthearted and free. He came to adore Sophie and was watchful of her. Now that the hierarchy between them was settled and everyone was in positions that suited their strengths, there was order and peace in the household. We owe our misperceptions about alpha behavior to studies of large groupings of wolves placed into captivity and forced to fight for dominance or to cower into submission. In nature, wolf packs are more likely to consist of extended family systems, packs of between 5 and 15 wolves, led by an alpha male and an alpha female, whom the pack trusts and has reason to trust for the survival of them all. The main characteristic of an alpha male wolf is a quiet confidence, a quiet self-assurance. Richard McIntyre, a researcher of wolf behavior at Yellowstone National Park, told an ecologist, You know what's best for your pack. You lead by example. You're very comfortable with that. You have a calming effect. The other members of the pack, the various beta and gamma wolves, can thus go about their tasks with greater reassurance in the wisdom of the alpha. At the bottom of the hierarchy is the omega, the underdog, the lowest ranking wolf, arising from natural personality traits in relation to others in the pack. The omega generally eats last and serves as a kind of court jester who acts as an escape valve. And he's often picked on by the other wolves. He bears the brunt of the tensions they face in the wild, where they are subject to attack from predators or from rival packs, and during lean times in the hunt for prey. The omega acts as a kind of social glue, allowing frustration to be vented without actual acts of war, wrote a wolf conservationist. The omega is so critical to the pack structure that when a pack loses its omega, it enters into a long period of mourning, the conservationist observed, where the entire pack stops hunting and just lays around looking miserable, as if there were no longer a reason to go on. The loss of the omega can threaten social cohesion and put the entire pack at risk. Depending on the composition of the pack, an omega might not be easily replaced. The new omega would mean a demotion for one of the lower to mid-level pack members. Either way, the pack is destabilized. After all, these roles are not artificially assigned based on what an individual looks like, as with a certain other species, but emerge as a consequence of internal personality traits that surface naturally in the forming of a pack. Humans could learn a lot from canines. The great tragedy among humans is that people have often been assigned to or seen as qualified for alpha positions, as CEOs, as quarterbacks, coaches, directors of films, presidents of colleges or countries, not necessarily on the basis of innate leadership traits, but historically on the basis of having been born to the dominant caste or the dominant gender or to the right family within the dominant caste. The assumption being that only those from a certain caste or gender or religion or national origin have the innate capacity or the deservedness to be leaders. This is a tragedy, not just for the many overlooked alphas from marginalized groups whose talents have gone untapped or unrecognized, who have had to watch organizations founder under insecure or ill-suited alphas. That should be flounder. Okay. It is a tragedy, not only for the misplaced alphas who may be in over their heads and who struggle to lead disgruntled staffs that may not respect them. It is a tragedy for humankind, which is deprived of the benefit of natural alphas who might lead the world with the compassion and courage that are the hallmarks of a born leader, male or female, of whatever religion or background or caste, the actual intended alphas of the species. Chapter 14, the intrusion of caste in everyday life. A father and his young son were out at a restaurant in Oakland, California on one of their precious days together, now that the mother and father had separated. The little boy ordered what he thought he wanted, but when the food came, he said he just wanted to drink his juice. The father had been worried about the effect the disruption in the family might be having on his son and wanted to keep the same stability and order in his little boy's life. He wanted to hold to the same standards they had always had, of showing gratitude for the blessing of food and eating what the universe had seen fit to put before you, of keeping to the manners they had established when they were all together. Mainly, he wanted his son to get his nourishment. didn't want to return him to his mother hungry, as he surely would be if he filled his little stomach with sweet juice and snacks. He remembered the times he filled up on sweets and had no space left for mealtime. What he couldn't tell his son at that moment, but would have to tell him later when he was big enough to understand, was that he would have to grow up respecting authority. One day, he would no longer be an adorable little toddler, but would be a black teenager or grown man, and respecting authority, following the rules, could mean his very life. This was his only child, the most precious human in the world to him. The boy was so sweet-faced, innocent, and free. How could he tell him that the world, his country, saw him as a threat? When exactly is the best time to break a child's heart? Should a parent clip them a little at a time, spread it out to spare them the pain of a single blow? Should a parent sit down and get it over with? You could argue that the sooner a child knows, the safer, the more prepared he will be. Maybe a parent should hold off as long as he can, give his child the longest possible chance to be a child. He'll have the rest of his life, decades, to live with reality and adjust himself to the truth. Maybe the most loving thing to do is to wait. Wait until something happens. Somebody drops the N word on him at the playground, or a teacher checks him for running down the hall, but not his white schoolmates, and he knows it's wrong and wants to know why. Back in 2014, Tamir Rice was 12 when officers shot him within seconds of their arrival as he stood in a Cleveland Park playground with a pellet gun, despite the fact that Ohio was an open carry state, and it is a common occurrence for boys to have toy guns, an all-American thing to do. Tamir Rice happened to be the same age as the fictional Jim when the beloved fictional father, Atticus Finch, gave him an air rifle in To Kill a Mockingbird, the very scene from which the title comes. Lots of the American boys play with guns, are given guns, and aren't killed for it. Tamir Rice died before he could even ask why. This father in Oakland didn't believe in guns, and that wasn't the issue anyway. The issue was his son's life and what the father could do to protect it. The challenge for a parent in the subordinate case is to calculate the precise and optimal moment to break the truth to a child before the case system does it for him, to figure out how to stretch their innocence until the last possible moment before it's too late. Another father, an immigrant from West Africa, had to find a way to push past his sorrow to break the news to his little boy that he could no longer be a child, that he could not jump and dart and shriek like other children. He would have to tell his son that it was too dangerous. They were in America now. The father in Oakland was a respected professor at a local college. In fact, African American history was his field. He would figure it out when the time came. That moment was weighing on him, but that day was not today. The father looked back at his son and told him he needed to go ahead and eat his vegetables first, like Daddy did, and then he could drink his juice. The little boy scrunched his face and shook his head and began to cry. A woman at a nearby booth had been listening to their exchange. She was an older, grayish blonde woman from the Dominic case. She scooted from her booth and walked over to the table where the father and son were sitting. The father could see the shadow of her form moving toward him. The woman stopped and stood over them. She leaned toward the little boy and told him, "You drink your juice if you want to. It's okay to drink your juice." And did not address or acknowledge the father. She focused her attention on the little boy as she stood there. The father was beside himself. A perfect stranger had gotten up, disregarded the parent, and told a child to disobey the parent right in front of the parent's face. The woman had crossed so many boundaries, it was hard to process. Something had made her feel entitled enough to enter into the private space of people she did not know and veto a father's decision regarding his own son. This was Oakland, right blue home of Huey and Tupac, where such phrases as gender nonconformity and microaggressions are part of everyday language. The woman would not have gotten up if she didn't perceive she had a right to. Had she done this to other parents? Would she have breezed past a white father, ignored him to tell his son to do precisely what the father had just told him not to do? The father held up his hand like a traffic officer signaling a car to stop. Ma'am, you need to go sit down, the father said. Don't come to my table. I don't know you. The woman looked stunned at the rejection, but turned around and went back to her booth. The father had a hard time enjoying his own food after that. He would remember this moment long afterward. The United States has a centuries-old history of people in the upper caste controlling and overriding the rightful role of lowercase parents and their children, the most extreme of which was selling off children from their parents, even infants who had yet to be weaned from their mothers, as with fillies or pups rather than human beings. One of them, remarked an enslaver, was worth $200 the moment he drew breath. This routine facet of slavery prevailed in our country for a quarter of a millennium. Children and parents denied the most elemental of human bonds. Even when children were permitted to remain with their parents, caste protocols undermined their authority and punished them if they tried to protect their own children. A mother in Louisiana was administered 25 lashes for countermanding an order given her son by the white mistress who owned them. Several of the most gruesome whippings and tortures were administered on enslaved men who intervened in cases of violence against their wives or children at the hands of an enslaver or overseer. Thus, enslaved parents could offer their children little shelter or security from the frightening creatures that lorded over them, historian Kenneth Stamp wrote. Nor could they protect themselves. But if the upper case did not see the evil in this, the lowest case children could see it. Once, when an overseer tied a woman up and whipped her in front of her children, the frightened children pelted the overseer with stones, Stamp wrote, and one of them ran up and bit him on the leg as they cried for him to let her go. The caste system may have treated them as cattle or machinery, but the children responded instantly as the human beings the dominant caste refused to see them as. It was only in the mid-20th century, with the protections arising from the civil rights era, that black parents had legal and political resource to shield their children from abuse, or to call into account harm done to their children at the hands of the state. But the essential contours of the hierarchy remained intact, the modes of expression having mutated within the times. Modern day case protocols are less often about overt attacks or conscious hostility and can be dispiritingly hard to fight. They are like the wind, powerful enough to knock you down, but invisible as they go about their work. They are sustained by the muscle memory of a relative rank and the expectations of how one interacts with others based on their place in the hierarchy. It's a form of status hypervigilance, the entitlement of the dominant case to step in and assert itself wherever it chooses, to monitor or dismiss those deemed beneath them as they see fit. It is not about luxury cars and watches, country clubs and private banks, but knowing without thinking that you are one up from another based on rules not set down in paper but reinforced in most every commercial, television show, or billboard, from boardrooms to newsrooms, to gated subdivisions, to who gets killed first in the first half hour of a movie. This is the blindsiding banality of Caste. Every day across America, wherever two or more are gathered, Caste can infect the most ordinary of interchanges, catching us off guard, disrupting and confusing, and potentially causing mayhem for everyone in the hierarchy. These are scenes of Caste in action. Doorbell rang at the home of an accountant from the dominant Caste in a wealthy suburb of a Midwestern city. The accountant and his family had only recently moved into the neighborhood. Through the glass sidelights of his front door, he could see a woman, an African American woman, there on his landing. He knew exactly what that meant. The dry cleaner in town offered its customers pick up and drop off, so he went to get the clothes that needed cleaning, and then opened the door to hand the armload of tousled clothes to the woman waiting out front. The woman stepped back. "Oh, I'm not the dry cleaner," the woman said. "I'm your next door neighbor. I came over to introduce myself and welcome you to the neighborhood." The woman was the fashionable wife of a prominent cardiologist, exceedingly upper class, yet labeled subordinate case, on site, still, to someone who had just moved next door to her. They would both have to recover from that one. Next, a college professor in Chicago had just returned from a bike ride and picked up his mail in the lobby of his apartment building off Michigan Avenue. He was African American, in his 30s, patrician of face, still in his helmet and cycling gear. He stepped onto the elevator en route to his floor, and barely noticing the other man on the elevator with him, he began going through his mail. He saw something of interest and unsealed one of the envelopes. The other man was horrified. "You're supposed to be delivering the mail, not opening it." This seemed to have come out of nowhere, and the college professor looked up and saw that the other man was white, but didn't fully register the accusation, and he was just going about his day, and gave an honest reply. "Oh, I want to see what's inside," the professor said. The other man looked even more stricken now, shaking his head in disgust, mistakenly believing he was witnessing a crime in progress. The professor got off on his floor, and only later did it occur to him that he had been taken for a delivery boy in his own building, an assumption so ludicrous he hadn't bothered to consider it in that moment, which left the dominant case man convinced that he had just seen a black messenger brazenly open up an actual resident's mail in full view of another resident. This is the self-perpetuating mischief of Caste. The next example. The phone kept ringing at the civil engineer's desk. He had deadlines to meet and projects bearing down on him. But over and over, the phone broke his concentration and wasted his limited time. The engineer was from the dominant Caste, and so, too, was the man pestering him. On the face of it, the intrusion would seem to have nothing to do with Caste. Here was a white contractor calling a white engineer for answers about a project underway. The engineer was a supervisor with a general idea of the project, but the project was not his. It belonged to another engineer on the team, as a contractor well knew, one who happened to be African American and a woman. The white contractor had been told to go to her with any question he had, but the contractor had ignored her, ignored protocol, and had gone to the dominant case engineer instead. The white engineer answered the contractor's questions at first to be polite and to move things along, but the phone kept ringing, and it was disrupting his own work, and it was hindering the project in question. The black engineer could hear this unfold in front of her from her cubicle next to the white engineer's. From her desk, she could hear it every time the phone rang, while hers sat mute and silent. She could hear the white engineer's impatient replies to questions that both of them knew should have come to her. The white engineer grew agitated with disbelief. When the contractor called the next time, the white engineer let him have it. I indicated to you from the beginning that you need to talk to D about day-to-day matters, the white engineer said. If you have a problem with that, we'll have to find another contractor for the job. The minute the white engineer hung up, the black engineer's phone rang. On an ordinary workday, the case system had pulled a dominant case man into its undertow. It had drained him of time and disrupted the operation. He found himself in an unexpected fight against an invisible foe, forced to take a stand for his colleague and against, perhaps unbeknownst to him on a conscious level, the case system itself. If there is anything that distinguishes Caste, however, it is, first, the policing of roles expected of people based on what they look like, and second, the monitoring of boundaries, the disregard for the boundaries of subordinate case, or the passionate construction of them by those in the dominant case to keep the hierarchy in place. After the 2016 election, the surveillance of black citizens by white strangers became so common a feature in American life that these episodes have inspired memes of their own, videos gone viral, followed by apologies from management or an announcement of company-wide diversity training. People in the dominant case have been caught on video inserting themselves into the everyday lives of black people they do not know and calling the police on them as if they wait for a friend at Starbucks in Philadelphia or try to enter their own condo building in St. Louis. It is a distant echo of an earlier time when anyone in the dominant case was deputized, obligated even, to apprehend any black person during the era of slavery. With the resurgence of Caste after the 2016 election, people in the dominant case have been recorded calling the police on ordinary black citizens under a wide range of ordinary circumstances, with videos cropping up almost daily at one point. In New Haven, Connecticut, a woman called campus police on a graduate student at Yale University who had fallen asleep while studying in the common area of her dormitory. Officers demanded her identification even after she unlocked the door of her dorm room. We're in a Yale building, an officer said, and we need to make sure that you belong here. In Milwaukee, a woman called the police on a corrections officer whose key fob had malfunctioned as he tried to open his own car door. A man called the police on a software engineer who was waiting for a friend outside a condo building in San Francisco. As the white man briefed the authorities from his cell phone, the man's little boy, uncomfortable with his father's actions, begged him to hang up and let it go. A woman walking her dog stood and blocked a marketing consultant from getting into his own condo building in St. Louis. She demanded that he show proof that he lived there before she would step aside. When he walked past her, she followed him into the elevator and onto his floor to see if he, in fact, lived there. In the video that the man took as a precaution, she can be seen tracking him all the way to his apartment, checking whether he was a resident even after he unlocked his door to go inside. And the woman began to stalk a black man in Georgia when she saw him out with two white children. From her car, the woman trailed Corey Lewis, their babysitter, as he drove from a Walmart to a gas station and to his home after he did not permit the woman, a complete stranger, to talk with his children alone to see if they were all right. Lewis, a youth pastor who runs an after-school program, started recording the situation on his cell phone. In it, the children can be seen calm and unfazed, buckled in their seatbelts in the back of the car. His voice is strained and disbelieving. "This lady is following me," he says in the video, "all because I got two kids in the back seat that do not look like me." The woman called 911 and asked if she should keep following him. She continued to trail him even though she was told not to. By the time Lewis got home, a patrol car had pulled up behind him, an officer heading toward him. "Jesus have mercy, what is wrong with this country?" a woman outside of the camera frame cried. The officer told the children, a 6-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl, to step out of the car, and Lewis's voice grew tense. The outcome of this police encounter and his very safety depended on what those children said, and he asked them to please tell the officer who he was. "Please," he said to them. Satisfied that Lewis was, in fact, their babysitter and that the children were okay, the officer, just to be safe, called the parents who were out at dinner. "It just knocked us out of our chair," the children's father, David Parker, told the New York Times. Afterwards, a reporter asked one of the children, 10-year-old Addison, what she would tell the woman who followed them that day. Her father told the Times her response: "I would just ask her to, next time, try to see us as three people rather than three skin colors, because we might have been Mr. Lewis's adopted children." These intrusions of Caste would seem to harm the targets more than anyone. Given the widely publicized attacks and shootings of black citizens at the hands of police, most Americans know by now that calling the police on a black person can carry life and death consequences. Frivolous calls squander public resources and distract police from actual serious crime to the detriment of us all. Beyond that, when any citizen is disrupted in the midst of everyday life and responsibilities, it is, in fact, a societal disruption, a tear in the daily workings of human interaction. These people are part of the American economy, and when they are interrupted, schools and businesses and institutions suffer an invisible loss in output as their workers get blindsided from their tasks. These intrusions serve to reinforce Caste by derailing lowercase people, subverting their work lives in an already competitive society, imposing additional burdens not borne by their dominant Caste colleagues as they go about their work, as occurred to me in Michigan some years ago. I could hear footsteps behind me, but paid little attention. This was an airport, and there were footfalls and roller bags all around. I had just landed in Detroit on an early morning flight from Chicago for interviews I needed to conduct as a national correspondent for the New York Times. I'd already lost an hour going from Central to Eastern Time, and I was thinking of all I'd have to do in the space of the next 8 hours. If the first interview was at 10:30, and if it took me 40 minutes to get downtown, maybe more since this was rush hour, I needed to get straight to the rental car to make this work. Any delays in the day's interviews, and I might not make the flight back to Chicago that evening. I thought to myself that I'd worry about that later and just get to the Avis bus as soon as I could. I thought about how it always seems that the shuttle you're looking for is the one that is just pulled off. And no matter what company you book, the one you need is always the last to show up. I was walking fast because I always walk fast. And I was headed to the sliding glass doors in the direction of the shuttle stop when I heard them. The footsteps were closer and faster and heading toward me. Why would anybody be heading toward me? It was a man and a woman. It happened to be a white man and a white woman. The woman's light brown hair swinging just above her shoulders as she ran. They had a parka and corduroy look about them, and both were out of breath as they reached me. We need to talk to you, they said, walking alongside me. I could see the shuttle bus lane through the sliding glass doors and buses pulling up, and was not fully registering whatever it was they were saying. Why are you in Detroit? What are you here for? I'm on business. I'm here for work. I was thinking that I did not have time for whatever travel survey they were conducting, and now I could see that Avis was on schedule. The shuttle bus was pulling up to the curb. People were queuing up to board the bus. I have to catch my bus, I told them as I walked out of the terminal doors. Where are you coming from? They asked, one on each side of me now. I just flew in from Chicago, I said, nearing the clot of people in suits and overcoats boarding the shuttle bus. Is that where you live? Why are you asking me this? I need to get on the bus. We need to know if you live in Chicago and what you're doing in Detroit. The last of the passengers were climbing on board. The doors of the bus were wide open. The driver was looking down at me and at them. The man and the woman stood there holding up the bus, holding up the passengers, holding up me. What is this for? We're DEA. We need to know where you live, how long you will be in Detroit, and exactly what you're doing here. This was too preposterous to comprehend. The Drug Enforcement Administration? Why in the world were they stopping me out of all of the travelers at the airport? This was a day trip, so I didn't have luggage, like a lot of business travelers between cities close to each other. I was in a suit like everyone else, coach bag slung over my shoulder. Covering the Midwest as I was at the time, I used to tell people that I catch planes like other people catch the subway. Airports were a second home to me. How could they not see that I was like every other business travel boarding this shuttle? The people on the bus were checking their watches and glaring down at me through the windows as I stood at the steps. The driver shifted in his seat, and I could hear the shake of the engine, the snort of the brakes, the transmission about to shift, the driver's impatient hand on the door pull. I blurted out what they wanted to know so that they wouldn't leave me alone. I live in Chicago. I'm here for the day. I'm a reporter for the New York Times, and I need to get on this bus. We will allow you to board. We will have to ride with you. Shaking now as I climbed onto the shuttle, its air thick with the scorn of fellow travelers. I looked for an empty seat, people pulling away as I sat down. The whole exchange had delayed everyone on the bus, and for all that anyone could see, it was because of a woman, a black woman who probably didn't even belong with real business travelers and might be a criminal to boot. The two agents took seats directly in front of me, staring and assessing, their eyes never leaving me. Twitter did not exist, and there were no cameras on cell phones to go into video mode. The bus was filled with business people, white people, or I should say, white business people. I was the only African American on the bus and one of the few women, and there were two agents surveilling me and my every move. The other passengers glared at me and at the two agents and back again at me. I was in utter disbelief, too shocked even to register fear. It was a psychic assault to sit there, accused and condemned, not just by the agents, but by everyone on the bus who looked with contempt and disdain, seeing me as not like them, when I was exactly like them, a frequent flyer on business like anyone else on the bus, early on a weekday morning, having just flown into a major American city and needing to focus on the work that I, like them, was there to do. I wanted to proclaim my innocence of whatever it was that all of them were thinking. When you are raised middle class and born to a subordinated caste in general, and African American in particular, you're keenly aware of the burden you carry, and you know that working twice as hard is a given. But more important, you know there will be no latitude for a mishap. So you must try to be virtually perfect at all times, merely just to tread water. You live with the double standard even though you do not like it. You know growing up that you cannot get away with the little things that your white friends might escape with. Adolescent pranks or shoplifting on a dare or cursing out a teacher. You knew better, even if you were so inclined, which I wasn't and never had been. I needed to regain my composure and clear myself of the accusation of their presence. They hadn't believed I was a reporter, so I decided to be conspicuously what I was. I fished for my pen and notebook out of my bag. I figured nobody could stop me from taking notes. It was a natural and protective reflex for me, like breathing. I had to I had a captive audience bearing witness to my performance of emergency journalism. In silence, I looked across at the agents and with my quaking right hand made notes of what they were wearing, what they looked like, how they were looking at me. They hadn't expected this, and they turned to look out the window and down at the floor. It was a long ride to the car rental lot. Now they felt the sting of inspection as I jotted down everything I could about them. And in that moment, I took back some fraction of the power they had taken from me, proved who and what I was to anyone watching, or at least that was how it felt to me at that time. Soon the bus pulled into the Avis lot, and I took a deep breath. They had ridden all the way from the airport, trailing me, and I had no idea what the next step would be. When the bus came to a stop, I stood up like the other passengers. The agents looked up from their seats. "Have a nice day," they said. And it was over just like that. Except it wasn't. I somehow made it to the rental counter and somehow got the keys to a car, but I don't remember any of it. What I recall is getting turned around in the parking lot that I had been to dozens of times, going in circles, not able to get out, not registering the signs to the exit, not seeing how to get to Interstate 94 when I knew full well how to get to I-94 after all the times I'd driven it. Now in the car, away from the agents, I was beginning to comprehend the seriousness of that encounter, only now able to admit my terror. The other business travelers were likely well on their way to their appointments, perhaps annoyed at the delay, but able to make preparations in their heads for their meetings. Maybe get a coffee on the way. This was the thievery of Caste, stealing the time and psychic resources of the marginalized, draining energy in an already uphill competition. They were not, like me, frozen and disoriented, trying to make sense of a public violation that seemed all the more menacing now that I could see it in full. The quiet mundanity of the terror has never left me. the scars outliving the cut. We are told over and over again in our society not to judge a book by its cover, not to assume what is inside before we have had a chance to read it. Yet humans size up and make assumptions about other humans based upon what they look like many times a day. We prejudge complicated breathing beings in ways we are told never to judge inanimate objects. I'll start tomorrow on chapter 15.